Oh, would you look at that? It's a Nikon. I admit I haven't shot with a Nikon camera until now. Maybe that's not so strange, except that I've owned and shot with every other major camera brand except Olympus. Well, actually I shot with an Olympus point and shoot once, but I won't hold that against them. But you all piqued my interest, so I pulled the trigger on a lot of this Nikon D80, a battery grip, and a Nikkor. I just realized this is my first time saying that out loud. I hope that's how you pronounce it. 50mm f1.8D lens for $120. If that sounds like a good deal to you, you're in luck because I've seen them for less. I was just binge shopping late one night and pulled the trigger on it. I get some weird things showing up at my door after those sessions. What makes the Nikon D80 a particularly fun camera for me is that I own its contemporary, the Pentax K10D. Released just 3 months apart, these two cameras share similar 10.2 megapixel CCD sensors. Actually, they share a lot more in common than you might think. Looking over the list of specs, you'd have a hard time distinguishing them from each other. But in the hand, it's a different story. They both feel great, but just very different. I don't know if I could ever pick one over the other for how they feel, but I suppose you might have a personal preference either way. But just look at the body design. Very different designs here. Just like my K10D, you can trust the CCD sensor of the Nikon to do its magic, and you can shoot in only JPEG if you want. This speeds up the writing a lot and gives you an almost unlimited buffer. It uses less total memory, and the pictures just look great out of the box. I shot RAW plus JPEG and only ended up using the RAW for challenging exposure situations. But what you're seeing here in this video is almost all straight out of the camera JPEGs. Of course, if you're doing something slower paced like landscape, I guess you might as well record in RAW, and the Nikon D80 has you covered there with a good RAW file to work with. So why would anyone buy this camera in 2020? Well, because it costs less than $100, and I'm cheap, and maybe you are too. But is the Nikon D80 any good? Well, I'm glad you asked. Cue the music. Since I mentioned the Pentax K10D and I own both, you may be wondering how they compare with each other. I don't really like being nitpicky with comparisons, so I'm cutting to the stuff that I think might actually matter. They both cost about the same, right under $100. They both have great CCD sensors that take great images. Here's a few practical differences I noticed. The Pentax has weather sealing. That's either a huge deal to you, or you're like, why would I ever take my camera out in the rain? Yes, why would you ever do that? The Pentax has sensor stabilization. I mean, it's not like today, 5-axis crazy stuff, but it's something. The Nikon D80 doesn't have any specific technical features over the Pentax that affect my style of photography, and they both share the awesome strength that I talked about earlier in the video. However, there are two practical benefits I found for the Nikon D80 over the Pentax K10D. Hear me out. The autofocus system just felt a little faster and more confident on the Nikon D80. I don't use autofocus a ton on these, so I'm not the best judge of this, but after using the D80 over the last few months, I've gravitated more towards using the autofocus. In fact, the whole shooting experience just feels a little bit faster. And finally, again from a practical perspective, you seem to have more cheap autofocus lens options for the Nikon than you do the Pentax, and the market is flooded with them, and that often drops the price well below the Pentax alternative. This isn't always the case, and that's not to say the Pentax lineup is lacking anything necessarily, but it's just worth knowing if there's a very specific lens type you know you want and you have a tight budget. If there is, look at the options between the two systems first and then pick the system. You may save a lot of money this way. The Nikon D80 is an awesome camera, and I had a lot of fun shooting it. For a sub $100 DSLR, you're going to get great colors, a usable autofocus system, great compatibility with lenses, and that makes it a great start to photography, or you can pick up secondhand for cheap just to play around with. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe. Let me know if you are shooting with the Nikon D80 or any of the other Nikons, and anything I might have missed that you would want to point out that make the Nikon D80 a great camera. Hope you're all taking some great pictures out there, and as always, happy snapping.